Hello and welcome to the second video blog. This time we'll be covering units 3 and 4. We're looking at risk communication and the social amplification of risk. Now both of these, as with the unit 2, can be seen as further frameworks to try and understand what is going on so the companies can get a social license to operate and be able to perform effectively. So the Fischoff piece on risk communication of 20 years of research and the Morgan and Fischoff one on mental models, those both are frameworks to understand, okay, how can we communicate to the public? And so we need to kind of bring in that research and then say, right, what are they doing? What's well established and works effectively in various different fields? And let's incorporate that into the political risk analysis area. Now the mental models one, while it provides a good sound framework that's been developed in laboratory settings and various areas, it can take a bit of time to develop and implement. Nevertheless, even if you can't develop a full risk communication plan, the key principles for how companies and governments should communicate risk are essential. So the general do's and don'ts. So also that's the key thing I'd like you to take away from those two pieces. Now as for the Boudet piece on the fracking one, this is a really good one which we would be looking out for where others may have done some great research, in this case on fracking, to try and get a better understanding of why the various publics reacting and responding as they do and perceiving the risks. I say publics because there are multiple publics out there, okay? And so the Boudet one is good in terms of it says, right, well, I'm looking at what's happening in Philadelphia, New York, and compare those perceptions of fracking with those for, say, Texas and other areas. And basically saying, as you'll see from the reading, that there's greater acceptance of the fracking industry in regions that have had a long history of dealing with energy companies, oil and gas and coal, as opposed to those who have less experience and been less ingrained in their society, like in New York State, for example. And it's therefore probably, you could say, no coincidence that we've seen New York State, I mentioned the other week, imposing moratoriums, freezing fracking there. Now for the social amplification of risk framework, what we have here is where it helps to bring together these various components. And the key one really to look at first is the Casperson and Casperson one on the social amplification of risk framework. Now this, the real key thing for this is providing a series of key questions of which any organisation should ask itself when trying to deal with thorny issues regarding a social licence to operate. First of all, what are those risk characteristics of the risk we're dealing with? Much like the risk perception class of dread, non-dread risk and things like that. So at least to try and understand what's going on there. Second, what are the amplification and attenuation stations we got on there? For example, how is social and traditional media amplifying or reducing the risks? Or what people are hearing or talking about each other in various places? Or what might be governments saying? What might institutions be doing, the actions, inactions, so they can amplify or reduce the actual perceived risk. So we have the risk event, and then that risk event may go up or may go down according to how those institutions are. The third question to ask is therefore, what are those ripple effects? As in terms of how might people be modifying their behaviour in response to that risk, for example. So if there's a food contamination issue, which you'll be looking at the BSE case for this week in the UK, contaminated beef, the consumption of beef meat plummeted significantly. Okay, so that was a ripple effect where people modified their behaviours. Now if you modify your behaviours and people are eating less of a certain substance, say beef in this case, then when we move to the fourth part, impacts, then this naturally has consequences of various different orders. So for the BSE example, we had impacts on the beef industry where consumption of beef went down dramatically. But people still need to eat. So what are they going to eat? Well, we therefore saw sales for things like chicken and fish increasing in those areas. So even though there may be some losers in certain situations like this, there are probably also some winners. And you'll see from the that BSc piece, there's talks about how the institutions had to be reformed, the government Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries had to be done away with to try and regain the public's trust, both from the industry side and from the government side. So maybe a couple of years old from the 90s and early 2000s, but hey, it has really got some great lessons for what we're dealing with things today. The final piece just to touch on is the Nick Pigeon one on nanotechnology. Now again, this is something which companies would love to try and get understanding of. What are those more emerging, kind of also over the horizon events and risks that we're talking about? And nanotechnology, while in the public discussion domain, isn't really talked about a great deal, but for companies involved in nanotechnology, what they don't want to happen is it starts to slide in kind of that sort of GM food issue. It becomes a little bit controversial, where even though in the US GM food's been widely accepted, in Europe GM food products are banned because of the perceived risk of being unhealthy and the potential environmental concerns. So that is hitting potential product lines and opportunities there across Europe. Although we are seeing in the US, and you may see it in various places, where products are now being advertised as GM free, tapping into that slightly growing undercurrent of concerns about the safety of GM foods or having a better goodness for the environment, more sort of organic areas. So watch that space, what's going to happen in the US. But the nanotechnology one is good to say, okay, well, what do we need to look at? And interestingly, one of the points you'll see from that is talks about, well, we have situations in the UK, for example, where they haven't handled risk issues particularly well, and other countries in Europe. And therefore the track record is not so great. Therefore, from the public's perspective, is say, well, given that you haven't handled other issues particularly well, why should we trust your word on nanotechnology as it comes through? And the companies will be looking to the regulatory authorities to be efficient in their communication so they can be clear and precise, and that can help companies as well. Otherwise, it can come back and bite them and undermine their potential aspects there. So we've got both government and companies in that particular frame space there. The last point I want to make is regarding your midterm paper, 5-pager, which is really intended as a briefing, as a summary to really home in and crystallize and be very concise in helping to bring to life these various concepts of risk perception, communication, social amplification of risk. Yeah, there's only a short amount of space, but treat it and thinking as you're presenting this to a decision maker. He or she will want to know what are the key issues at hand, what are the frameworks you're using here, what are the key findings and recommendations that you have from me here. So that's why I've really emphasized on the kind of conciseness aspect of this. Now you can, as you see in the description of the of this assignment, it can either be on the past or current or a future emerging threat. Even things like the Takata airbag recall could be something that's going on at the moment, or the perceived safety of riding on Amtrak from the Amtrak crash. But no doubt there's plenty of other examples that you can think of there. So let me know if you've got any questions, and June the 8th is the deadline to get that to me. I look forward to engaging you further for the rest of the course. Thank you. Bye.